Today I'm going to tell you, who are the Freemasons? Where did they come from? And in general, what do we know about them? What is a Masonic conspiracy? Does it exist? So today we are going to talk about the Freemasons. In legal terms, Freemasons are a closed society where only initiated people are allowed. They have their own code of honor, rules, regulations for meetings, rituals, and so on. History tells us that the Freemasons are a religious political movement that emerged in modern times in the form of a secret international organization with mystical rituals aimed at moral perfection. That is, Masons gathered in their Masonic lodges and talked about philosophy, world order, how to know themselves, how to know God. This is such a philosophical circle. Masons themselves speak about themselves in different ways. For example, the Grand Orient of France, that's the name of the French Masonic Lodge. It is said to be a philanthropic, philosophical, and progressive institution. Its purpose, the search for truth, the study of morality, and the practice of solidarity. It all sounds like excuses. This search for truth, solidarity, that is not clear what people do and why they gather. The United Grand Lodge of England speaks of itself as the largest non-religious, non-political, fraternal, and charitable club. And indeed, this lodge raises a great deal of money for charity. Freemasons, in principle, did charity often and still do to this day. Where did Freemasonry come from? Freemasons themselves tell that they have their chronology almost from Adam, that this system of very ancient beliefs, a system of special relationships of initiated persons who understand philosophy, the divine structure of the world, and that almost from Adam, they lead their age. There is a myth about the builder Hiram, who was, if not the first, if Adam is considered the first, then Hiram should probably be considered the second. He was the first builder, and he built the famous temple of King Solomon. He had 3 apprentices, and at some point, the apprentices wanted to grow to master and began to pry secrets from him. How to build temples, almost the secrets of the universe, or secret words he had to tell them. Hiram told them nothing. At some point, they killed him in that temple. Killed him how? One of the disciples wounded him with a circular. Then Hiram ran to the exit of the temple, to 1 exits. But there was a second disciple standing there who stabbed him with a pointed square. Then Hiram, bleeding, rushed to the 3rd door, led out of King Solomon's temple into the street. There stood the 3rd disciple, who struck him on the head with a wooden hammer and killed him. And since then, the hammer, the circlet, and the square are among symbols of Freemasonry. By the way, they are interpreted in different ways. The circlet is a magical object that measures the limits of your knowledge, the degree of closeness with the Lord, square too. All lodges interpret these symbols differently, but they are integral symbols of Freemasonry. The disciples, having killed their teacher, were naturally concerned not to be caught. So they buried him somewhere very far away, and at some point he could not be found. Then King Solomon instructed to find the corpse of this Hiram, and they found his grave by sticking an acacia branch into the ground. And since then, the branch of acacia is also considered a symbol of Freemasons. That's the legend. That's where the Freemasons came from. What does the word itself mean? Where did it come from? As you know, Gothic temples in the Middle Ages were built not for years, but for decades, sometimes even centuries. When building a Gothic temple, the builders had to live somewhere, and they accordingly settled near the temple and formed a shop fraternity. You know that in the Middle Ages there was a system of shops. This shop fraternity was engaged in jewelry, this one was engaged in blacksmithing, that one was engaged in nomadism, and these were builders. Thus, the original origins of Freemasonry go back to the guild. Everything is quite simple. Builders gathered, exchanged some secrets of their crafts, news. They had a clear professional society, quite closed from other communities. And that's how the whole thing developed. We are not talking about any philosophy and Kabbalistics. It is still a shop brotherhood. Then other people start to it. Other people start to join it. There are no statutes yet. There are no rights. It is just people united by one cause, gathering, for example, on Sundays. People of other trades, merchants, officials, people of other professions start to join. And it all starts to change, because a closed club can't discuss construction from morning till night. People begin to discuss business, politics, social structure, church, their relationship with God. And thus, little by little, This narrow professional society is transformed into a kind of philosophical circle. Most historians and most Masons will tell you that the beginning of modern Freemasonry is June 24, 1717. On St. John the Baptist's Day, the Fourth Building Lodges of London met at the Goose and Gridiron Ale House to form the first Grand Lodge of London and Westminster. The 18th century was the heyday of Freemasonry. How is Freemasonry organized? At the moment, Masonic lodges differ from each other in rituals, number of degrees, rites, statutes, and so on. I have tried to combine all that I found in the related literature and some kind of extract to give out. So, what is a lodge? A lodge is a word of medieval origin. It comes from the word lodge, that is, a gatehouse or a lodge. It was such a structure near the construction site where workers rested, stored their tools, and they gathered in the working afternoon. Now lodge is called hunting lodges and even luxury houses, which are in African territories where hunters come to rest after they shoot. Or just people, like in a fancy hotel, come there. Here lodge is such a term now from the field of hotel tourism. A lodge is characterized by a distinctive name, room, and east. East is where the lodge is located. Meetings take place in Masonic temples. Now they are no longer temples in the conventional sense of the word. Although, if you look at the Grand Lodge of England, here's a look at what it looks like. Quite a temple-type building. As a matter of, several lodges could use the same place or the same temple to congregate there. A Masonic lodge is a building in which several lodges gather. There are a varying number of rooms where different lodges can meet. The first lodges had the name of where the Freemasons proper gathered for their meetings: the Crown, the Apple, the Goose and Gridiron, and the Grape Brush. Now the Freemasons, according to various reports, are 30,000 lodges worldwide. That's a pretty big organization, and different numbers give 5 to 10 million Masons on the entire planet. It is necessary to discuss at once, the Masonic organization does not have any single center. There are no heads of Freemasonry, there is no Masonic Pope, and there is no Chief Mason either. All lodges act independently of each other and are subordinate only to their supreme officers whom they choose. That is, from this point of view, it is meaningless to speak of a worldwide Masonic conspiracy because the Masons are disunited. If you look at the Grand Lodge of Russia, the Grand Lodge of England, they are in contact with each other, of course, but one is not subordinate to the other. The members of a Masonic lodge call themselves brothers. The structures within Freemasonry fall into several categories. There are two main systems. The first system is called the Swedish system. It was proposed in 1750 by the Swede Carl Friedrich Eklöf. Under this system, a new member is required to follow the Christian faith without fail. This also plays an important role in the discussion of the Masonic conspiracy, as later, before the 19th century, there would be claims that Freemasons are godless and worship Satan. In reality, however, according to the Swedish system, the main prerequisite for entry into Freemasonry is to have Christian faith. In the English system, it is to have any faith you want. Attitudes towards different religions have changed over time. That is, at first, for example, Muslims were not accepted into Freemasonry, women were not accepted into Freemasonry, and people of color other than white were not accepted into Freemasonry. If you now go to the site of the Grand Lodge of England, there, please, dark-skinned people, there are Muslims, there are Hindus, and anyone else. That is, with the passage of time, Freemasonry as a flexible institution transforms. According to the English system, which is principle the main one for all Freemasonry, it is quite enough that the person who wants to join Freemasonry recognized his belonging to this or that religion. That is, in fact, it is an organization closed to people who believe in God. That is, there is no godlessness there. There is no Satanism there from the beginning. In the English system, there are only 3 degrees of seniority: apprentice, journeyman, and master. In the Swedish system, there are 11 such degrees, and there are lodges with even more complicated systems. We will then talk about what was going on in the 18th century. There is an even more complicated system. According to the Swedish system, the Supreme Master is endowed with the 11th degree and is abbreviated as V*, S*, V*. This, translating from Latin, is the deputy of the wisest Solomon, the same Solomon to whom Cherem built the temple. 3 dots. This is also a symbolism, which is interpreted by the Masons themselves as a connection of opposites of the highest harmony. In general, the Masons are very confused, and everything there is built on symbols and secret signs, which I will now tell you about. Workshops of the first three initiatory degrees, apprentice, journeyman, master mason, are called craft or otherwise blue lodges. The degrees are this foundation of Freemasonry. Membership in other Masonic organizations, for example, requires obtaining the degree of Master Mason and continued membership in a Blue Lodge. Some Masons may receive up to 32 degrees. The Scottish Charter, for example. What does a degree entail? With each degree, you are a more enlightened and therefore initiated person. In the very last floors, you even know the secret name of God. That is, everything, as you can see, is mixed with deep philosophy. Later on, you add alchemy and all that history. Well, look, man has a tendency to get into packs. There are soccer fans, there are music fans, there are reenactment groups, there's societies. Yes, they're at universities. There's secret societies. People are always going. How? I'm in a secret society. You can't even tell anyone about it? That is why there is always a dense veil around Masons, and further this secrecy gives rise to suspicion that Masons secretly control everything here. What else is characteristic of Freemasonry? Well, first of all, symbols. I started to tell you about the square. I told you about the circlet. What are the most common symbols of Freemasonry? Probably almost every one of you has seen the all-seeing eye on the strongest currency of the world. The $1 bill is clearly a Masonic symbol. A ruler and a plumb line is a symbol which Masons interpret as equality of estates. Angle meter, a symbol of justice. A circular, a symbol of the public. Square means according to some Masonic interpretations of conscience. Common stone, crude morality. Cubic stone, morality. Worked hammer, a symbol of power. Trowel, leniency to the weakness of people and attitudes of severity to himself. The acacia branch is immortality. You remember, on the grave of the master it was stuck. The coffin, the skull and bones, contempt for death and sorrow for the disappearance of truth. You see, in the eyes of these skulls, it's that sadness. The naked sword is the punishing law. The dagger is a symbol of preference for death and the seal of the Freemasons. These are a few emblems. The most common is a circle enclosing two mutually intersecting equilateral triangles, one with its apex facing upward and the other downward. This is the Great Seal of the Order. And now about the secret signs. Masonic handshake, when you greet a man and touch his with your thumb. I have never had my hand shaken by a Mason, so I can't say whether it is or not. But if someone touches your hand with their thumb, know that there is a Freemason in front of you. Rings and rings with Masonic seals so that Masons would recognize each other. Secret words, passwords, so that a person came into the room, heard the words, the password, and realized that here is a Mason and here is such a gesture, a hand behind his back. It means that a man has undergone the rites of Freemasonry and he has taken the Masonic oaths with all his heart. This comes from the Bible. And he said unto him, put his hand into his sinus, and he put his hand into his sinus, and took it out of sinus, and the hand became white and leprous. And then he said unto him again, put his hand into his sinus, and took it out of his sinus, and it became his body again. In the Bible verses, the heart, that is, the sinus, symbolizes man himself, his very essence. If you look, you will see that Napoleon very often in his portraits had his hand behind his back. Napoleon was very close to the Freemasons, and this is undoubtedly a Masonic sign. Well, to be honest, Stalin liked to do that too, but I honestly don't believe that Stalin was a Freemason. But nevertheless, it is considered to be one of the main Masonic symbols. So, the dawn of Freemasonry is the 18th century. This is where the legend of not only Solomon's Temple, but also the fact that Freemasonry is nothing more than a new iteration of two old orders first begins to resound. The first order is the Order of the Templars. Templars absorbed during the Crusades in themselves the wisdom of the East, the mystical secrets of Judaism. They learned to turn lead into gold and the like. Then Philip the Beautiful defeated these Templars. Some of them fled to Portugal, and some of them fled to Scotland. And there's a Scottish Masonic charter. It is he, according to legend, went from the Templars who passed their knowledge on. The second story about the Germanic order of the Rosenkreuzers. Part of the Templars fled to Germany. There they passed on their knowledge through a generation. Here already the Rosenkreuzers with their treatises carry this secret philosophical knowledge. Now the Templars and the Rosenkreuzers, all this has combined into Freemasonry. What's going on in the 18th century? This is the age of the Enlightenment. These are the great philosophers: Montesquieu, Voltaire, Franklin, Jefferson, Locke. These are the people who begin to influence the historical process very strongly. It is they who actually prepare the French Revolution with their works, and most of them are Freemasons, or close to Freemasons. And here, Freemasonry becomes fashionable. I'm not afraid of this word. People come into Freemasonry. Well, let's talk at once that anyone can join Freemasonry, but it is an elite movement, and certainly in the elite movement, where do these conspiracy theories come from? The fact that in the Masons come businessmen, come politicians, come people who are close to royalty, that is, royal heirs, tomorrow's sovereigns. They all join Masonic societies. And when you sit in a secret club of initiates, here are intellectual people, here is Voltaire, here is some prince of blood, are rich some merchants. Obviously, besides self-improvement and philosophy, you start talking about politics, you start talking about business. That's why all the talks that Masons are such harmless philosophers, intellectuals, they really thought about God. Well, of course not. Of course, when there is a closed society, and then I will show you what became of it in the 20th century. Of course, they begin to talk about the state structure. There are things that are kind of lobbying, career advancement. These things are harmless enough, but obviously, when the king is informed that his heir has joined the Masonic Lodge, and it is not clear what they are discussing there, maybe they start discussing a coup d'etat. And so these rumors about the Masons begin to spread, begin to surround them with a mystical veil, dangerous for the state. Because for sure there is something there, perhaps people are preparing a coup d'etat. And in principle, in France, the Great French Revolution contributes to it. It is the Freemasons who will be accused of preparing revolutions all over Europe, to execute all the kings on the scaffold, and to change the whole state system all over the world. At the same moment, in addition to the great philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, a number of other characters appear in Freemasonry. One of them is Martinez de Pasquales, who reinterpreted the Masonic rituals. He made them very complicated. He created an order called the Knights Masons Elect Cohens. Who are the Cohens? The Cohens are a class of clergy in Judaism. This connection of Freemasonry with Judaism, it then very well in the Russian movement of the Black Hundreds, from where all these words about Jew Masons will go. The Jews here have adopted Freemasonry, and Russian people want to deprive him of his native Russian land. That is the actual connection. It starts here. Pasquale makes Freemasonry very complicated. At some point, the Knights Masons in general become almost a parallel order. The admission procedure becomes more complicated. At the very top levels of Masonry, people recite psalms there for 6 hours at a time. One of the famous mystics of the time and philosopher of the time, Saint Martin, who almost gets killed during the French Revolution, he meets Pasquale. They have a very close relationship at one point, and Saint Martin even asked him one day, "Reading the Psalms for 6 hours a prerequisite to knowing our Lord? Is that a prerequisite?" To which Pasquale would say, "It is not a prerequisite, but I have nothing else to offer you." Everyone begins to fall into alchemy, into secret rituals. There is talk of philosopher's stone again. It's all incredibly fashionable. Pasquale creates a lodge in Bordeaux, in Montpellier, in Paris. These kind of super private clubs that have a few more degrees. I didn't write it all out because there's 1 degree, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. The 4th degree has 3 more degrees. All this is built by such a superstructure over the Masonic movement. And again, there are representatives of the elite. There are again rumors that here the leaders of destinies gather. These are the people who rule the state. Everyone wants to get there. Pasquale dies, but it is with his appearance, Freemasonry, a lot of mysticism, alchemy, and so on appears. Another Freemason you probably know about is Joseph Balsamo. He is also known as Count Cagliostro. Who's Cagliostro? He's also a figure, mystic, magician, philosopher, visionary. He's an ordinary con man. Well, let's say he's an extraordinary con man. The man was born in Italy. His name was Joseph Balsamo. At some point, he realized that he couldn't earn his bread by honest work, so he started doing things like forging documents, selling fake gems. And then he married a very beautiful woman named Lawrence. His aunt dies, he takes her last name. It's much more euphonious, Cagliostro. And somewhere afterwards, he stitches himself a count's title. Obviously, he was not a count, but in Italy in the 18th century there is, to put it mildly, a mess. It is a fragmented country. So you could draw the title of count all you wanted. He leaves for London, or rather flees, because he was caught for counterfeiting and almost put on trial. With his wife, he flees to London. There he tries to engage in small scams, even gets into debtor's prison. His wife agreed with the local priest, and he was released from prison. In general, with his wife he had relations. It mildly, not good. It is believed that he corrupted her. He rented her almost to important people to get closer to them. And at the end of her life, she testified against him in court. Cagliostro flees to France, and after some time returns England already a great magician, Count Cagliostro. He guesses the numbers of lottery tickets. He heals people. He tells everyone that he lives for 300 or 500 years and saw the Egyptian pyramids, and he makes his servants lie that they have been serving him for 4 centuries. He's immortal. He's covered in rings with huge stones that he makes himself, and he hands them out saying, "It's a trinket. It's worth half of London." It is clear that all this is fake, but nevertheless, he earns some money, but most importantly, he earns a reputation. Then he goes traveling around Europe with this reputation: France, Poland, Courland, and even St. Petersburg. In St. Petersburg, it's the time of Catherine the Great. He is welcomed well enough. He already arrives with great fame. Catherine favors him, because he is favored by Potemkin, then Catherine the Great's lover. And why does Potemkin favor him? Because he begins a relationship with Cagliostro's wife Lorenza, and he lavishes them with jewelry. And Cagliostro does 2 things. First, this is a historical myth, but many people write about it. What he said to Potemkin, "Your Serene Highness, I'll just show you magic now. Give me a bag of gold and I'll triple it and take 1/3 of the tripled gold for myself." And indeed, he does something like that. The gold becomes more. He takes 1/3 for himself. I don't know how he performed it. Perhaps he took 1/3 of the real gold and gave some fake gold back to Potemkin. Everyone is delighted. He predicts the fate. He guesses to Catherine the Great that she will be the greatest queen in the history of Russia. Didn't lie. Indeed, it turned out that way. Then he makes a mistake. He heals a dead baby, and the family who died a baby, just delighted, pouring tears, do not know how to thank Cagliostro. At some point, the midwives realize that it is a switch. He replaced the dead baby with a live one. They report it to Potemkin. Potemkin threatens him with a finger, and here, according to rumors and legend, Catherine the Great gets the story Cagliostro's wife has relations with Potemkin, and Cagliostro is expelled from Russia. Moreover, here also came the paper of the Spanish ambassador that Cagliostro lied that he is in the Spanish army serves, that he did not serve in the army, and so on. Cagliostro escapes. In France, he was involved in the story of the Queen's necklace, which was allegedly prepared for Marie Antoinette. Anyway, he ends his days badly. In Italy, he is imprisoned in a dungeon, where the entrance is upstairs on the roof so that he could not get out. His wife testifies against him. His wife is exiled to a convent. She dies there, and he dies after some time in this prison. According to the legend, it is considered that he did not die himself, and he was poisoned, but he was everywhere represented as a Freemason. And indeed, according to one of the information, he was initiated first into the English Lodge, then into the French Lodge, and here he tells everywhere about Freemasonry. That's the kind of character he is. Obviously, where there is mystery and mysticism, there are always a lot of swindlers. American lodges formed mostly in cosmopolitan areas like Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, where they attracted men in the middle and upper classes who could afford initiation fees and annual dues. Notable early members included Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and Paul Revere, who joined lodges near their respective homes to improve their social standing. The fraternity's values and principles, steeped in Enlightenment philosophy and liberal education, attracted many prospective candidates. Unlike their contemporaries, early lodges remained relatively small, composed of around 20 to 30 members, and membership fluctuated greatly due to business and travel demands. Members held their private meetings and social events in taverns, coffee houses, and other public spaces, and later pooled their resources to build dedicated Masonic halls. Lodges formed throughout the colonial United States and became early networks to connect traveling Masons and provide business, lodging, or other forms of financial support. On April 21, 1789, more than a year before Congress passed the Residence Act, a group of Georgetown merchants formed the town's first lodge, which they called Lodge 9. Early records link some of the town's most prominent men with the lodge, including Charles Fearer, a printer and publisher of the district's first newspapers, the Times and Potomac Packet. The Reverend Stephen Bloomer Balk, founder of the town's first Presbyterian church, and John Suter, proprietor of Suter's Tavern, where the lodge held its meetings and social events. In July 1792, President Washington and the commissioners selected Irish architect James Hoban's designs for the proposed President's House. Hoban became a Freemason in South Carolina, but remained active after he relocated to Washington. With few laborers available in Georgetown and the vicinity, Hoban and the commissioners recruited skilled labor from throughout the United States and abroad. Of the approximate 150 free and enslaved laborers who relocated to the district to build the White House, around 20 were known Freemasons. This group included Pierce Purcell, Hoban's business partner and supervisor of carpentry, Colin Williamson, superintendent of stone masonry, Clotworthy Stevenson, master carpenter, Bernard Crook, stonecutter foreman, Redmond Purcell, carpenter and joiner foreman, James Dougherty, stonecutter, and general laborers William Coghlan, David Cumming, and Andrew Eastave. Meanwhile, while on business in Edinburgh, Scotland, Philadelphia, merchant George Walker secured 7 more expert stonemasons, who had all been members of Lodge of the Journeyman Eight. The commissioners arranged for Georgetown carpenter and Lodge 9 member William Knowles to build the homes, workshops, and sheds around the White House for the workers. These laborers worked 6 days a week, in 10-hour shifts, while under intense weather and travel conditions. Spartan living and working conditions meant that Hoban and company relied on themselves for entertainment. In lieu of attending Lodge 9's evening meetings back in Georgetown, they decided to form their own lodge closer to the White House. They began to meet informally sometime in the spring or summer of 1793. Meanwhile, to help fund the White House's construction, the commissioners placed notices in local and national newspapers advertising tracts of land for sale. In early fall of 1792, they arranged for Lodge 9 to lay the White House cornerstone in a public ceremony. They hoped the event would generate sales and raise funds to pay their workforce and secure supplies. The White House cornerstone ceremony occurred on October 13, 1792. Participants assembled at Suter's Tavern in Georgetown and formed a long procession composed of the town's mayor, town council, the district's commissioners, Freemasons, and guests. They departed east and arrived in the open tract prepared for the ceremony. While the single known newspaper account does not specify who did what during the ceremony, Peter Casanave, the lodge's leader referred to as the Master, and his assistants likely presided over the cornerstone ritual. A brass plate engraved with a special inscription was deposited under the stone. Workmen, perhaps Colin Williamson in his role as project superintendent, lowered the stone onto its final position. The inscription on the plate read, "This first stone of the President's House was laid on the 13th day of October 1792, and in the 17th year of the independence of the United States of America. George Washington, President Thomas Johnson, Dr. Stewart, Daniel Carroll, Commissioners James Hoban, Architect Colin Williamson, Master Mason Vivat Republica." The White House cornerstone ceremony became the earliest Masonic event in Washington City. Although he did not attend the event, George Washington did participate in a similar ceremony for the U.S. Capitol the following year, on September 18, 1793. Several days before the Capitol ceremony, Hoban and his colleagues obtained an official charter to become Federal Lodge 1 and made their first public appearance during the event. Freemasonry grew significantly during the 1800s as new Masons arrived in Washington as part of the federal government's relocation to the district. The district grew from 2 lodges in 1793 to 5 by 1810. The White House and Capitol cornerstone ceremonies became seminal moments in American Masonic history and set a precedent for future interactions between the presidents and the local fraternity. Today in North America, the Masonic fraternity continues this tradition by giving almost $2 million each day to causes that range from operating children's hospitals, providing treatment for childhood language disorders, treating eye diseases, funding medical research, contributing to local community service, and providing care to Masons and their families at Masonic homes. The 4 million Masons worldwide continue to help men and women face the problems of the 21st century by building bridges of brotherhood and instilling in the hearts of men ideals for a better tomorrow. We'll go back to France. The Great French Revolution, as I told you, is prepared by the great enlighteners. And when the massacre Paris begins, the European monarchs look on in horror. There's talk of these Freemasons. It was they who prepared the revolution. They sat in secret circles all over Europe. Next, it will be the same in Austria, in Germany, in Italy, in Russia. Everywhere there will be this world Masonic revolution, with the purpose of overthrowing legitimate sovereigns, and enthronement means Masons or their henchmen. And at this point, rumors of a worldwide Masonic conspiracy begin to circulate. There are also Americans on the other side of the ocean. George Washington is the most famous Freemason in the world. Look, they have infiltrated everywhere. The French Revolution is one of the peak points. When they say about Freemasons that they are terrible conspirators, they brought down the French dynasty. What happens after the French Revolution? Napoleon Bonaparte, who is considered by many to be a Freemason, shows up in France a short time later, and all of his brothers were absolutely definitely Freemasons. Now for the conspiracy. What is this Masonic world conspiracy? As I have already told you, Freemasonry is not a movement for ordinary people, but a movement for the elites. At once, secret, unknown connections begin, and then these myths and legends begin to spread. Somewhere they are myths, somewhere they are not myths. I told you that lobbying, promotion of own interests, state policy, the great French foreign minister Talleyrand was a Freemason, of course. All this is discussed there. Very much for the theory of a worldwide Masonic conspiracy did a book by the Frenchman Leo Taxil, which saw the light of day in 1890. It's called The Devil in the 19th Century. And there, all our favorite conspiracy. The Masons, like the Templars, worship Baphomet, arrange human sacrifices, eat babies, drink blood, control the world through connections with big bankers and industrialists and politicians. The book contains the revelations of one Miss Diana Vaughan, who was a female Freemason, but then repented and told all that goes on in French Freemasonry. Later, Leo Taxil himself admitted that it was a hoax. He made it all up, and the woman he showed under the name of Diana Vaughan was not a Freemason at all, just an ordinary woman with whom he had made a deal. Well, you see, conspiracy is a thing that requires no practical proof. That's why smart people said, well, of course, he said that it's a hoax. But we realize he was pressured. I mean, they're all paved Masons there. So he was forced to say so, on purpose, to cover it up. Anyway, this myth is being fed and fed. But, you know, there is no smoke without fire, and there are things that now, for some reason, few people know about. But it was the biggest scandal in the 20th century connected with the Freemasons. I will tell you now about the Masonic Lodge in Italy, which was called the Lodge P2, or Lodge of Propaganda 2. And there was a really serious mess. What happened? The Lodge of Propaganda 2, or Lodge P2, was known since the end of the 19th century. Until 1976, it functions as a Masonic Lodge of Italy. One of the Masonic lodges. Masons there, discussing philosophy, meaning and being, and so on. But a man appears, whose name is Licio Gelli. He is by then a financier, an entrepreneur, a man who has to do with banks, newspapers, a writer, and even somewhere a philosopher. He was born in Italy and in the mid-30s went to Spain to join the Falangist movement, Francisco Franco's movement, to fight the communists. After defeating the communists, he returned to Italy, became a fascist, was close to Mussolini, and after the defeat of Hitler's Germany, after the defeat of the fascists in Italy, he stayed inside. He began to engage in cloth production, quickly became rich enough, and in 1976, he got into the Masonic Lodge P2 and began to gain weight there. He begins to surround himself there with important people, begins to make strong and important acquaintances, and the Grand Master of Italy at some point from the lodge expels him. In response, Licio Gelli threatens him with compromise. Lodge restores him, and with the passage of time, Licio Gelli becomes the head of the Lodge P2. This is how it exists until the 80th year. At some point, they again have a spat with the Grand Master, and the P2 Lodge is excluded from the Masonic movement. It becomes the Wild Lodge. What is a Wild Lodge? It is a lodge that is not recognized by the main lodge of the country, the main provincial lodge. This is a Wild Lodge where Masons gather by themselves for various reasons. They are not recognized, they call themselves Masons, but the main movement does not consider them Masons. And this Lodge P2 begins to gain wild popularity. At some point in the 80th year, Licio Gelli, as a very public person, gives an interview. And among other things, he says, "You know, I have a very important influence in the Masons. Everybody knows me, I am a serious enough Mason." And one morning, on a completely different case, a financial one, his villa is searched. The Carabinieri find 30 notebooks, no computers yet, containing dossiers on all the members of P2. These dossiers, these notebooks, are immediately taken to the Italian Prime Minister, and then the horrifying thing starts. It turns out that this lodge throughout Italy, about 70 branches, their half of the government consists. There are bankers, intelligence officers, deputy defense ministers, they control 4 major newspapers and 2 major publishing houses. That's where Berlusconi and his fellow future politicians first appear. That is, in fact, the police unexpectedly uncover the structure that runs the whole of Italy. And the further into the woods, the more interesting connections with the Vatican and the Vatican Bank. The famous case of how they laundered money through the Vatican Bank, mafia connections, the suspicion that Licio Gelli participated or was somehow involved in the assassination of Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, who was shot by the Red Brigades. This is one of the most terrible moments in the history of Italy, in the history of terrorism. He was involved in the investigation and delayed the investigation of the terrorist attack in Bologna, when 200 people were wounded and 80 people were killed, and the crime was attributed to the far-right guys from the ANR. And it is still unclear whether it was NAR or not. And there is a version that he was sponsored by the CIA and NATO in order to direct fascists to shoot all over Italy, communists, and people close to them. A wild scandal starts, the government resigns, an investigation begins. In fact, it leads to nothing, because then a series of murders begins. A banker is killed in an American prison, journalists are shot, someone is poisoned. That is, the whole story, it somehow rides the brakes and disappears. And more, Licio Gelli then goes to jail for being connected to the bankruptcy of the Ambrosiana Bank. But nothing further happens, escapes to Switzerland, gets caught there, bribes the guards, goes to Latin America. And there's another connection to P2. P2 included a lot of Latin American dictators, and Licio Gelli had different passports of different countries. And soon he dies in 2015 in his villa, a rich man. It's practically 2015 yesterday. He dies at the age of 94. Nothing was done to him, no Freemasons were convicted. But nevertheless, the P2 Lodge was absolutely guaranteed to run the economy of Italy, was connected to the mafia, influenced politics, influenced finance. And when we talk about the Masonic conspiracy, it was a specific conspiracy of a secret society. Then there are threads that they were involved in the attempted fascist coup in 1970. That is, when we say that such funny people in white gloves, in aprons made of sheep, with skulls, are studying philosophy. At the same moment, someone is making money and career. Who were the people who opposed the Freemasons? Hitler disliked the Freemasons. He believed they were plotting against him, and he viewed them quite clearly as enemies of the Nazi regime. Hitler ordered the execution of all known Freemasons. And during the Second World War, it is estimated that up to 200,000 Freemasons were killed. In Soviet Russia, all secret organizations were outlawed, and there could not be any here. The Soviet government fought them. Saddam Hussein made Freemasonry illegal in '80. He thought they were promoting the ideas of Zionism. And of course, what? That's right. They want to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Only a few Muslim countries, despite the fact that Muslims are now allowed to join the Freemasons. Only a few Muslim nations recognize Freemasons and allow them in. They are Turkey, Morocco, Malaysia, and Lebanon. The Catholic Church is the only organization that forbids Masons from being members. That's a paradox too, isn't it? The Masons say that we accept only those who believe in God, and the Catholic Church, we do not recognize you. So that was a brief excursion into the history of Freemasonry. It is an interesting movement, a movement shrouded in mysticism, a movement that is suspected of being a world government. Not without that, as you and I have heard. Somewhere they were quite the local government. Obviously, you can't tell everything in an hour and a bit, but these are the basic things that I know about the Freemasons, and now you know. If you are interested, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. I want to thank you again for watching this video. It means a lot to us. Thank you and see you in the next episodes.